efficiency and for change of doing different studies. Right? Because you've got your negative controls, you have many different outcome cohorts. You don't have to go and reconstruct it and see. Good. One of our goals for today is to make sure there's a large amount of interaction amongst yourselves and building collaborations between designers and programmers, interactions with us, so we can help you move your studies forward, also so we can get involved in interesting clinical studies that are going on there, and not to have you sit in a room all day and just listen to lectures. So this is our first breakaway, let's work together type of problem. I'm going to assume that all of you have had a chance to read the Graham and colleague paper. Yes? Everyone pull it out, you're going to need it. Please. Oh, yeah. If you don't recall, we're looking at cardiovascular bleeding and mortality risk in elderly patients treated with dabigatran or warfarin for non-valvular AFib. In the next hour, we're going to do an exercise on this paper. And the exercise is going to work in the following way. Each of us are going to break up into teams of 4. So that will be 2 programmers, designer pairs. And since most of you are next to your partner right now, you'll kind of just go every 4. We'll have that work. Given the table shape, kind of interaction with 4 might be a little difficult, so push your chairs back, take some of these tables in. And within those groups of 4, start a conversation over 2 topics. Primarily the first topic, which is how could we reproduce the Graham study? And how reliable are the estimates or quantities that we're inferring from this study? Basically, think about what some of the shortcomings of the design or the analysis might be that limit the reliability. We're focused on, could we reproduce it, and are the results reliable? And then we're going to share in a discussion together for about the last 30 minutes. So this is a large task. You have 30 minutes of discussion, 30 minutes of group time, but I think we can do it. So let me get you started with really the list of questions that you should focus on in your discussion over reproducing the study and asking about its reliability. Within the framework of the cohort method, really we want to lay out what are the target and comparator cohorts that Graham chooses to use. How are these 2 cohorts, or the analytic subsets of these cohorts, made more comparable? So we might envision that individuals across these cohorts act as each other's counterfactuals. How does Graham define his outcome cohort, the outcomes of interest? What is the time of risk to these outcomes for each of the individuals in the T&C cohorts? And finally, model specification and misspecification. How are differences in outcome rates measured between 2 different groups? So what are the estimates being produced? And in terms of reliability, how can we assess those estimates and ask, are they of good quality or not? When you're doing this, really try to pay attention for a look of ambiguity and a lack of transparency in what's provided. I think this is a very good study. It has its limitation in what's provided in our ability to reproduce it. And that will make us as a group much more aware of the detail of information we need to be providing in our own work going forward. Because we'd like to help you make both reproducible and reliable results. So the type of detail you might want to consider, I'm just going to give a quick example on the first question, one thing you might want to think about. So we need to define the T and C cohorts. In the paper, these are defined by a number of different medical concepts in terms of inclusion and exclusion criteria. How are those medical concepts defined, validated, used? Right? So that's one thing to think about in each of the questions. So I want to give you as much time as possible in the discussion. So I'm going to switch back up to the kind of the major 5 questions that you have. The 4 of us are going to be floating around the room to help you. If your group looked like you're in a great discussion, we're going to step back. It doesn't mean that we don't like what you're saying or you as people. It just means you're doing exactly what you should be doing. Well,
except for one of you.
Yeah, yes. But I'm standing up here. It's all okay. And start answering these 5 questions. To make sure we stay on track, I'm going to set a timer for 25 minutes, which I'll then give you a 5-minute warning, which will really be less than 5 minutes. It will give us a time to come back and fill in all these questions as a group. You ready? All right. Let's reproduce. All right, I'd like to bring you all back together so we can have a short group discussion.
I'm considered under 90. I'm considered 90.
All right, let me ask a general question. Who thought this was a really good paper? Yeah, I actually thought it was a really good paper. Who didn't think it was a really good paper? Why not?
It was unclear how we could reproduce a lot of this.
And it's unclear how reliable their estimate or believable their estimate is. Yeah. But this is kind of the creme de la creme of work right now. Let's walk through the questions together, highlighting a couple of points just to make sure everyone has them. We'll start with the target and the comparator groups. Of course, the statement says we're going to look at elderly people with Medicare beneficiaries who have non-valvular AF, who are new users of dabigatran or warfarin. I've arbitrarily called dabigatran T, warfarin C. The same thing, they're reversible on that. Is that correct?
It's not complete.
No, it's certainly not complete.
No kidney transplant.
So I'll just lay out what in the paper is written down as the inclusion criteria, and then we'll fill in some of the exclusion or not inclusion criteria as we go. So they're looking for all patients who have inpatient or outpatient AF or flutter. How do they find all those terms? How do they make sure they have all the appropriate medical concepts?
Nothing is mentioned.
Nothing mentioned?
They just said I said it's
Fewer than 6 months.
Yes, some expert like me, huh? Says, wait, I saw
at
AF.
least 6 months of time.
So these codes here, right? So some standardized procedure, or at least reporting of the procedure that they used. We're going to look at everyone who filled at least one prescription within some date, and then we're going to define our index date. So the index for an individual, or time 0, in our package nomenclature as the date of the first prescription. I thought it was very interesting that whereas we have no idea how they define the medical terms, inpatient or outpatient criteria, the supplementary material does provide lots of codes for their outcomes. I don't know which is more important. They're both important, right? If we want to reproduce it, I have to know who's in all 3 of those cohorts to make everyone upset when we start talking about 3 cohorts. Normally on papers we talk about inclusion and exclusion criteria. It's important to remember that exclusion is the same thing as not inclusion. So to standardize our language and reproducibility, I would like us just to talk about inclusion criteria, and if they are really excluding, they are inclusion of not the following properties. So instead of writing not each of these, I've just written their exclusion way, but you can say all patients who do not have the following. And here are just a couple of them that I wrote down. What did we miss?
Kidney transplants.
Yeah, a complete list of what they actually mean by other anticoagulants, right? Someone find a...
They mentioned rivaroxaban and apixaban.
Yeah.
Aside from that, kidney transplant.
Yeah, without kidney
Dialysis.
transplant? How is kidney transplant defined?
Yeah.
No dialysis or kidney transplant.
Yeah, dialysis how? Meaning there's been a procedure or billing code for dialysis? Yeah, or maybe.
They also had no, not in a skilled nursing facility or nursing home.
Mm-hmm. And how's that encoded? How do they make that decision?
I'm not sure, I assume they have sites.
Yeah, I don't know, they visited each individual?
Had site
And this also is a problem when they assess that the patient receiving the 7.5 dose,
Mm-hmm.
they did not receive the dialysis, because you see if they exclude it.
Yeah.
So I would just make the comment that some of the reason why this may have passed peer review is some people are so used to using the Medicare data that there are conventions that are associated with those definitions that get reused and reused. They still should have been transparent in how they said it, but I suspect that others would think, oh, you just use
Jesus. It would be nice to get that community's commonly accepted cohort definitions in OHDSI to be usable, right? We can even say the commonly accepted Medicare definition, which actually means the following.
Right.
We can move on. There are also, some other bits that were quite vague, like received prior treatment with an anticoagulant, but received prior treatment when? In the washout period, through any of the observation of the individual before the index date.
Doesn't have washout period or 6 months because it's unincluded.
Yeah, yeah. So that's probably 6 months, but then they also have another when, undergoing dialysis, just washout, or any time in the record.
Prior 6 months.
And prior sickness? Or
prior
in the prior 6 months. Yeah. So for the diagnosis of these things. So we need to sort of codify or at least provide a mechanism to have all this information in a consistent, human readable and machine readable way, so we could reproduce a study like this. There's questions we already talked about, which is fine. So we have two cohorts. We have our target, our comparator cohort. We like to say that these two cohorts are exchangeable with each other or can serve as each other's counterfactuals. What does the paper do in order to help achieve more balance between the factuals and their made-up counterfactual in the other group? Yeah, it's a propensity score model. Does it matter that they were using initiation of dabigatran as their one in their outcome?
Since they're doing greedy matching, so maybe yes.
So no, I'm not sure why they actually say that. It's 0-1. You can redo the labels. It just changes what your intercept term is.
For fitting the propensity score model, but Rohit's point is when you then go use it for matching.
Yeah, it's good to know who's who.
It could matter.
And moreover,
matching algorithm.
in the greedy matching, they are not defined caliper. Like we don't know. When they are throwing out those.
Yeah. So we'll get to what they do with the propensity score in a minute. They say they fit with a number of predictors. What predictors?
Maybe those in table 1.
Maybe, or maybe those in one of the supplementary table, or maybe something else altogether. Right? They say we use sociodemographics. I think that's a good idea. I'd like to know which ones. Is it in the data?
It's in the data.
I think it's just table 1, because the demographics are.
The online data.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are all of the baseline comorbidities and methods in table 1?
Which one?
Baseline comorbidities and medications?
Yeah.
They're all in table 1?
There are a bunch.
Medications, comorbid supplements.
We're not disputing that there are comorbidities in table 1 and the supplement.
I am disputing the statement that they are all in table 1.
These are the guys that create hundreds of thousands of cohorts.
Yeah. Especially since I like the and other potentially relevant variables, which I think that's a very good point. They should be included as
Relevant
well.
variables should be
Relevant
included.
variables certainly should be there.
So I would just say they started balancing even before the propensity score model with some of the inclusion-exclusion criteria, removing areas that would be outside of a likely common support, like contraindications or things like that.
Yeah. So how were these chosen? God came down and spoke to Graham.
Expert opinion?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess.
Maybe the common practice is like what everybody does.
Yeah. So they build a propensity score model. Is it a good propensity score model? What diagnostics do they show on it?
There's no diagnosis.
Standardized.
They give you standardized differences after.
After
Did they
not
look good?
before.
But before we don't know what happened.
They might have been fine before.
Might have been worse.
So is that the red and blue overlap plot?
Yeah, but there's no red and blue overlap, right? There's no distribution of propensity scores, so we can get an idea of what the overlap is between individuals. And so that would be very nice to provide as well. And they do one-to-one greedy matching and assess balance and show us something after. So there's plenty of diagnostics we talked about yesterday that can go into this. The outcome, of course, they're looking at the risk of 4 outcomes. I don't know, let's assume stroke is the one that they're really interested in. How are these outcomes defined? Yeah, so now they gave a whole bunch of ICD-9 codes, right? And assume that we know what to do with ICD-9 codes. Most everyone in this room does, except for me. But is that a good list?
Well, they do talk about that they went to literature and see that the positive predictive value for traumatic hemorrhage is this.
Yeah, has anyone, have you read that paper? You read the paper that they quote that say this works?
No.
Yeah. So Patrick, which is the example that you removed?
So if you did go and read that reference, it specifically says in the conclusion of that reference paper, we do not recommend that you define the definition with these codes and use it in an inpatient setting. You must use all codes, not primary discharge code. So specifically, the definition that's being used that they're citing, the paper that they cite recommends to not use that definition.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because of discharge.
But it does have good positive predictive value.
So yeah, there you go.
But again, positive predictive value
Is it the whole story?
on whom? On which?
Well, it's not on
negative
these
predictive value is
individuals.
horrible,
What's that? It's not that it's horrible, it's that you have a choice you have choices. And one of the choices that you have to make if you're using administrative claims data is you decide that you want a hospitalization code. Then are you going to restrict yourself to the codes that only occur in the primary position, or are you going to use all codes? The paper that's referenced there did a chart review and evaluated the difference between using primary only versus using all codes, and came to the conclusion that you could do it either way. However, our recommendation is don't restrict to primary only. Use all. And they specifically said, we know we're going to use primary only, not use all. So
It's a good paper.
I have a question. So
Let's see
table
what
one,
you suffer from this mostly because we don't.
For the predictive value.
we can distinguish them, and all our job is to reproduce and evaluate reliability. We will reproduce exactly as they did.
Yeah.
The question of whether or not that's what you want to do is the question of reliability.
There.
so in table one, when they match, they only show the after match. So they say they found like less than 1 patients in different groups. I'm assuming they mean 0, unless they did some weird, because you can't have negative patients, but in a propensity score model, you could have some weird negative.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh.
occasionally you have extremists. Occasionally you have extreme assignments. I'm not.
So why would you
not
report it
recalling
as
that.
negative? I mean, why would you report a less than 1 person in a group?
That's a percentage, right?
No, it's an N.
For
They
what?
have an N, and then they have a percent.
No, but those are percentages in that table.
Okay, so
Less
the
than
N
1%.
is just the 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is a small number.
But still,
And
it's
then there's no difference?
So they have very good positive predictive value. Interestingly, there's large overlap with the authors of this paper and the original mini Sentinel study. You can pull up the protocol when I give you the slides, and the outcomes differ. No statement on why.
Say that again. So what they are reporting on is what their study, and there's one more mini Sentinel study done.
So there was an original mini Sentinel study looking at the same outcome in the same, I believe, group of people. Yeah. with a slightly different definition of an outcome.
And agreeing with their
Yes.
Yeah.
Qualitatively.
Yeah.
No. No.
Oh, well, that was just crude. Oh, well, okay, yeah. But the adjusted agrees. But it was only crude, but only crude was given. Okay. Yeah, warfarin's going to kill you.
So there's a hyperlink to that.
Because you're old.
Study.
Yeah, so then you have the hyperlink to that protocol, and you can go look at the difference. So we'll talk a little bit about the outcome and time to risk. We're waiting for example, stroke to happen. They're going to do the first event. They choose to use a Cox proportional hazards model to model that. What is the time of risk for an individual for the outcome?
So we struggle with that. In the graphs, they have 180 days, but then they say they did 3 models, and one which was for those who took the drug for a very long time, more than 180 days. Another model which all the people in that model took the drugs between 90 and 180 days. So we were really confused by what they actually did.
Yeah. So let's focus on the primary model where they fit everyone before they start considering looking at different subgroups to as a way of examining model fit. So an individual gets their first prescription on index day 0. Their time at risk starts at day 1 and continues until, in this case, it doesn't continue forever. How long does it?
2014, end of 2014.
It continues until an event happens. Either, we stop looking at them, or what in relationship to exposure to the drug?
They stop.
Basically until they stop taking the drug. Okay. So they're really doing, it's the risk on drug, right? It's not the risk that having been exposed to the drug might provide.
Can you re-enter the cohort if you take it up again?
In this study, I do not know.
I think this study would say no
Because you wouldn't be in the
definition of first exposure. So by definition, a second time wouldn't be a first exposure.
Okay, but what if you have that gap and you're now a new person?
But
Yeah, what if it's 6 months?
Yeah, if you were a new individual.
So discontinued therapy is lumped in with other rate censoring, i.e. end of the...
Yeah, you're censored. Yeah.
So how did
So you're looking for, you're positing that there's an acute response.
So have you ever showed the period of the drug, each drug? Have you ever showed in these paper?
So there are some subgroup analyses in this paper that look at changes of risk based on cumulative exposure. They're also hard to interpret because almost everyone in this study really only had 1 prescription anyway.
Yeah.
So those subgroup analyses are great, but they're on a few number of subjects.
Can I just ask a quick question about the 3-day gap? Because
Yeah.
I don't understand.
A 3 or 7 day gap, or yeah.
This particular data, so the dose is in the data set, so they know how long somebody was exposed to dabigatran? Is that?
Yeah, what you get is these are
I guess
outpatient pharmacy
7 days
dispensings,
Yep.
and so you have a day's supply
Yep.
that's on every row. So what they're likely doing,
Yep.
what people commonly do is say, we'll infer that a particular exposure is the dispensing date plus the day's supply.
Mhm.
So if you have like a 30-day script,
Yep.
that gets you 30 days out, and then from that point in time, you think about when would you need to have them go back to the pharmacy to get the next script, and that becomes this gap
Okay.
window that they're referring to.
So wouldn't it be better to do a sensitivity analysis around that gap? Is 3 days too short? Should it be 4 days, 5 days, and how
They
did that?
look at 3 and 7.
Oh, they do that.
Oh, they only do 1, I think. Well,
Monday or I have a 7 day gap in my mind somewhere.
Okay.
They have
that
14
could-
days gap allowance.
Or
So
14.
the paragraph where
They also looked into different dose, right?
Yep,
150 versus 75. So it's just like what's the dose they prescribe to the patient. It's not about like how many total, let's say, the drug dose they have received during the period.
We're all these
how do they figure out dose?
How do they figure?
The prescribing dose.
Yeah.
How do you figure out dose?
I don't know.
That would be different codes. Well, at least they are.
Maybe,
For
yeah.
us, they're 75 milligrams, a different code.
So you have a code has a strength.
Yeah. But not. Yeah.
What is dose?
Yes, that's
Well, you
Yeah.
can't really
I don't know, I
cut it-
took 2 pills.
You
You
can't really
have
cut
the
it
one
down
hundred
in
and fifty
half.
million pill, but like how many you take, how long you take, the total number of drug use.
So how do I calculate dose?
But it's not computed,
No, I
it's
think- I
not
think
normalized by weight.
it's possible to calculate those, but they don't specify.
Talking about the number of strength, then you take a certain kind of thing.
It's possible to calculate milligrams prescribed.
They have the frequency, they talk about 150 milligram twice daily versus 75 twice daily.
Yeah.
So they must have the frequency information in the
Yes,
system.
but also,
Oh
That's
yeah,
what,
they have pharmacy.
that's the prescription.
and also is the cost of the 75, half of the cost of the or much lower.
Different.
Yeah,
I'm not challenging the notion that you might want to look at dose. I'm saying that from a reproducibility perspective, to say I'm going to study differences in dose requires that you define dose. And it is not trivial to assume dose. What you get on a code is a strength. If you want to talk about the difference in strength, that's fine. But if you want to talk about dose, which is now an inference of the combination of strength plus intensity, you need to explain exactly how you do that.
And adherence.
And yes.
You don't have to either.
It's very awkward that they don't show any numbers of patients in each group of drugs. Period.
Because they're really small, you start doing these subgroups.
They don't. They have to show how many people are in every group.
What is done in terms of reliability? Our ability to say this is a quality estimate that we can lay our hat on.
Well,
They do a lot of subgroup analyses, but what do?
They also try to show that the capacities for hours balanced differences.
Yeah.
But not before.
But not before. And in terms of reliability, their hazard ratio? They give you a hazard point estimate, a confidence interval, a p-value, all based on asymptotics, which assume there's no systematic error, that this is an observational study. You'd think systematic error might exist.
That is
So, like,
just a proportionality.
Right.
They haven't tested for modeling assumptions.
Well,
They
will
do.
tell us.
They give you a Kaplan-Meier curve. They look okay to me.
Which means there
But
is
there
no
is-
covariance.
What did we learn about yesterday?
But in the cave dose,
Calibration of confidence.
Right. So
And
we.
Kaplan-Meier doesn't use covariance. So
No,
these are
it's just-
adjusted
yeah.
estimates.
After adjustment, it might be fine. After adjustment, it might look really
And
poor.
it shows Cox,
that's different. Like,
So what do you think about their significant p-value?
are they actually different?
There are a couple in there.
No, they haven't done.
They don't control for that. Yeah. So something that can easily be done if you have set up your treatment and comparator cohort is you could also set up some negative control cohorts and rerun the same analysis on a set of negative controls. So you could calibrate your p-value for, which is basically adjusting it for residual bias that might exist, not only in the data structure, but the design choices that we've made. And what else can we do? We can calibrate p-value.
I would just want to ask, they did sensitivity analysis. Does that count as one of the methods to assess the reliability of their study?
Certainly does, right? You're asking if I change the assumptions from which the data are generated, so I look at just different parts of the data, how sensitive are my results to that? I could have also calibrated their confidence intervals as well, using some positive controls. Really nice framework. They did a number of sensitivity analyses in terms of time. I'm not going to spend too much time on them. They did a large number of subgroup analyses. I want to make a general statement, which is, so that means it's almost never true. So subgroup analyses are generally a bad idea. You might want to consider using interaction terms in your outcome model. That will allow you to reduce trouble from multiple testing, and also you can adjust for correlation between predictors, which you can't do in a traditional stratifying by subgroups. And correlation does seem to be a problem amongst some of the predictors that they have in there. Say lower dose recipients were more likely to be older to be receiving home health care or oxygen and have higher CHADS too. So instead of stratifying, we might want to adjust.
I have a quick question regarding, if you go back to the previous slide.
Sure.
So, do we really have to adjust for these, or look for the interactions, because we have already done a propensity score matching, by which sort of inherently adjust for these factors?
So the propensity score will not, will not necessarily find me and my true counterfactual. It will find me and an individual who might be as close to my counterfactual exists in the data. So we can do that type of balancing. But there are also factors that may or may not go into balancing, for which we want to make additional adjustment on the outcome, right? So the propensity score is a modeling of the exposure. We can do adjustment on the outcome for additional information on individuals that help change what the outcome effect is. My counterfactual might still be much heavier than me because I wasn't able to control for that, but we could adjust for it at the end if it's related to the outcomes.
I don't know if you mentioned this, but like they don't do any multiplicity correction, and they're doing a bunch of different models.
Yeah.
There's at least one with a 0.02 p-value that would not be significant.
Yeah. So there's no. So one of their major conclusions is that the shift in the hazard ratio between younger and older women is statistically significant. So here's the younger woman estimate, and it's huge because you have no younger women. Here's the older women estimate. And these are the confidence intervals that they report where they have not adjusted for multiple testing. I just did a simple readjustment, just assuming instead of one test, we're just doing 6 tests. So I looked here and said maybe I'm only going to do 6. I did the new adjusted confidence intervals, and they certainly overlap by quite a bit.
You also did nothing vis-a-vis sensitivity with regard to unmeasured confounders. So Rosenbaum's book says this is what you should do, a sensitivity analysis where you imagine that there's some unmeasured confounder, and you look at the effect it would have on the treatment effect depending on how strong the unmeasured confounder was. Here, we're talking a new drug versus a drug that's been on the market for 50 years. The possibility that there are factors that are not in the databases,
cost,
that are directing patients one way or the other seems very real to me here. No sensitivity analysis around that.
And the final group is, they say magnitude of each was greater for people who took more drug, but if you actually plot it, I'm not sure I see how it's always greater from one versus the other. Sorry. They do have some diagnostics on their model. There's no confidence intervals. It would be easy enough for the confidence intervals. In spite of all that, this was a really good study. Which, after our very short break, we're going to reproduce. And hopefully, in our reproduction, as best as we can, in our reproduction, we'll also introduce some measures of reliability to ask, and we put some weight on the answer that comes out of it. So there's now going to be a 10-minute break.